You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. The Manitoba Chamber Orchestra invites the audience to hear student pitted against master in Beethoven versus Haydn, their second concert in the 2022-23 season. Led by music director Anne Manson, the program calls into question the student-teacher relationship, nature versus neglect, hungry up-and-comer versus established veteran, with selections from the catalogs of two music greats. To learn more about the concert, I'm joined by Anne Manson virtually. Welcome back to Classic 107.
Thank you, Simon. It's great to be here.
And it has been a while since we've had you on the air, so I'm particularly delighted that you're back and delighted bringing music to the Winnipeg audience once again with the MCO season. It is an exciting time of the year, isn't it?
It's a great time of the year. We had a wonderful opening concert last week, and we're really looking forward to the Haydn and Beethoven concert on Thursday night.
So, as you say, this second concert, two well-known names, Joseph Haydn and Ludwig van Beethoven, or should I say Joseph Haydn versus Ludwig van Beethoven, the MCO having a little bit of fun with the competitive nature of these things, eh?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to frame it as a competition. I mean, I think that we're talking about, first of all, we're talking about Haydn, the Miracle Symphony, which is 96.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually the first of the London symphonies that Haydn wrote and was performed a good 20 years before Beethoven 7 was written and performed. And so I think that we're talking about two very different composers, two different times in history, and two composing souls, musical souls that are trying to express something very different.
Yeah, that they certainly are. Let's go back a little bit in time. Can we chat about their relationship? One which began when Haydn was passing through Bonn and met a 20-year-old Beethoven who was still living in his hometown then, right?
Yes, they met a couple of times, and both actually, when Haydn was en route to London or en route back again. And Haydn was impressed by Beethoven and offered to teach him. But by the time Beethoven arrived in Vienna, Haydn was very, very busy and didn't have a lot of time. And I think Beethoven was a sensitive soul and didn't necessarily respond that well to, a feeling that he was being left behind by Haydn. And Beethoven also snuck around to study with other people, but was concerned that Haydn didn't find out about that, et cetera, et cetera. My view is that Beethoven learned not from music lessons with composers. He learned by absorbing the music, and there's no doubt that he heard a lot of Haydn and that he studied a lot of Haydn scores, in addition to other composers who were around at the time. So he may have said he didn't learn anything from Haydn, but we can certainly see in his music that he has learned something from Haydn. That's for sure.
I do want to chat a little bit more about that. I mean, you mentioned Beethoven's kind of sneaky studies, if you will, with like Albrechtsberger and Salieri and two sensitive souls. I mean, that's sort of where we get to that crux of the drama, right? Like Beethoven being the fiery and hungry and rather testy young composer keen to establish himself. And then Haydn's at the other end of his career at this point. I mean, he's established, he's revered, he is the name of the day. So I'm wondering how you see the years of study with Haydn influencing or maybe sticking with Beethoven, especially as he moved into the middle period during which this Seventh Symphony on the program was written. How do you see the influence of Haydn there?
Well, I think that there are all kinds of, there are all kinds of ways that Haydn developed as a composer. And I think, first of all, we're talking about a personality, two very different personalities, and two very different circumstances in life. So Haydn was put on a retainer by when he finished at the Esterhazy court. And so he was basically given a retainer for life and given the freedom to do whatever he wanted, at the time that he was then invited to London and earned even more money, writing symphonies. So he was in a very secure position. People refer to him as Papa Haydn, and there's a feeling that he was basically a happy soul. He certainly was happy when he was in Esterhazy, and I think he found the years in London, which are the years where he met Beethoven and started to teach him, also very happy years. I think Vienna was a bit of a tough environment. Even Haydn was not as popular in Vienna as he was in London.
He was a celebrity in London. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And he had the luxury of developing as a youngish composer in the Esterhazy court, where he was adored, and given a tremendous amount of freedom. And, a press was developed to print Haydn's music so the musicians could get it. He was incredibly prolific, but I think he also felt that he had this huge sense of freedom to do whatever he wanted. And he had wonderful musicians he was working with. Beethoven never had that. And I think he started as a more fragile personality anyway. And by the time we get to the Seventh Symphony, Beethoven has been living in Vienna while it is being shelled by Napoleon, hiding in his brother's basement. So we're talking about, and the Seventh Symphony, the premiere of the Seventh Symphony was for war veterans. It was for wounded soldiers. So we're talking about a completely different context from the kind of happy celebratory context that the Miracle Symphony was written for in London. And we're also talking about, potentially a more vulnerable personality, and a personality, a composer who at that point knew he was losing his hearing and never seemed to financially get his affairs entirely in order. So there was a whole lack of stability. And I would argue a more emotionally volatile person. And we see all of that in the Seventh Symphony.
Yeah, we certainly do. One of the things that I was thinking about is, of course, the lives lived are vastly different, as you were just telling us. But musically speaking, one of the things that, at least to my mind, that Beethoven took and then ran with and then took to the next level was the idea of like thematic development in the music. Of course, Beethoven is famous for that, but that's something that Haydn really helped pioneer, right? In terms of the actual lessons, was there something musically that you think really stuck with Beethoven?
I don't know. I don't think we really know what happened in those lessons.
Yeah, there's no record of them, right? Like we don't have any letters.
I don't know of any.
I don't think they exist.
Yeah. I do think that a lot of Beethoven's compositional process seems to come from sometimes very small bits of material.
Little fragments. Yeah.
And in fact, he reveals his compositional thought process in the writing of the piece. So very often we start with small motivic bits that develop into something. Mm-hmm. And I feel that Haydn presents us with usually melodic material that has been developed already.
Right.
Whether it was subconsciously or consciously. Very likely it could be subconsciously, the way Mozart wrote. But I do think that Beethoven is so interesting to listen to and to look at because of those motivic elements that he starts with, and he shows you how they develop into larger thematic statements. And he shows you how he layers them one on top of the other as well. And it is interesting to think of his personality, which feels like a somewhat obsessive personality, revealing itself in that way. And I don't know that Beethoven had an obsessive personality, but I assume that was part of his makeup because of the way he writes music.
You know, I think what's going to be so fascinating about this program is rarely do we just get to hear Haydn and Beethoven back to back, both in their same form. It's not an overture and a symphony or something else. It is a symphony and a symphony back to back. And I think that's going to be a really unique experience for the audience, because we get to go from this 96th symphony, the Miracle Symphony of Haydn, right into the Beethoven, the Seventh Symphony. Haydn has become a sort of bread and butter for the MCO. It always sounds so wonderful, I have to say, Anne. I love the way the MCO plays Haydn. It must be really exciting to now tackle the Beethoven right after that, right?
It is exciting. It is a real challenge in our acoustic, taking on a piece that large. And I don't mean, it's not the physical number of people on stage, right, although that's part of it. It's the amount of sound that symphony generates. And of course, we have a relatively small string section. So we're going to have to, and that is not necessarily different from the size of string section that Beethoven might have had. I actually don't know his string numbers when the piece was premiered. So we will definitely, it definitely poses challenges for the orchestra. That acoustic, you know, we rehearse in an environment when the church is empty and there's nothing to absorb the sound. So it's difficult for members of the orchestra to hear each other, particularly on opposite ends of the stage, you know, the horns in the back of the hall. Then when the audience comes in, they absorb a substantive amount of sound. And suddenly everything is revealed, and it makes it easier to play. It also reveals everything that's going on in that context. So that's really the challenge for that. I mean, I think that we will approach Beethoven in a very similar way to the way we approach Haydn. But we do have this added challenge of the size of the piece.
Well, that to me seems like a great place to end this, because it leaves our Classic 107 audience with a great call to action. Go to Westminster, pack it,
Please,
and help the members of the MCO so that we can all together enjoy the Beethoven and the music of Haydn that is on the program. And it's been so lovely reconnecting with you and lovely chatting.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much, Simon.